Peace in, everyone. I am Trey MacVelle, bringing you the movie pie of Spider-Man Homecoming. Welcome, my fellow fans of film. Settle in and join the conversation as we do a detailed review of Spider-Man Homecoming. I am so excited to be doing this review, the third rendition of Spider-Man on the big screen. You know, Spider-Man has always been one of my favorite characters in Marvel Comics. I confess that I actually am a bigger fan of the DC comics, and I've always been, than I am of the Marvel comics. But Spider-Man has always been one of those characters that I enjoy thoroughly within within Marvel. So, needless to say, I've thoroughly enjoyed the idea of Spider-Man on the big screen. So, that was pretty awesome. But this particular movie was exciting because this wasn't just any old Spider-Man, folks. This was the Spider-Man that, this is the Spider-Man that's a part of the MCU. This is the Spider-Man that I can see next to Iron Man and the rest of the Avengers. So that's what had me particularly intrigued about this Spider-Man, going into production. I would say, hey, this, the taste that I got of this Spider-Man and Captain America Civil War, because of course that's where he was introduced, had me even more intrigued because I loved what I saw in that movie. And if you haven't seen the movie pie of Captain America Civil War, go ahead and click right here and check that review out, and you would get more of my thoughts on what I thought about Spider-Man in that movie. But in that movie, it was a sample size, and a sample size that whet my appetite for this particular movie. I must say though that I was curious about two things going into this movie, because after seeing the trailers, it had me curious and question a couple things. But I was curious as to whether or not if Tom Holland would convince me that he was not only Spider-Man, but that he was also Peter Parker. And you got a little sample size, as I said, in Civil War, but there wasn't enough to actually convince me that he was Spider-Man and Peter Parker. There was enough to get me excited and to convince me that he had the potential, but I needed a movie in order to convince me of that. So I was curious about that. I was also curious to see whether or not if this Spider-Man felt natural, if the world that they give us would feel like it belonged within the MCU. And those were two curiosities that I had, two hopes, if you will. But here's the thing. I also had a concern, because if you guys saw the trailers and the overall marketing for this film, I mean, it kind of felt like that this movie was aiming to be Iron Man 4 or, Spider-Man co-leading with Iron Man. Or at least that was the concern that raised up in me going into this film. So those were the things that I was looking forward to watching this movie. But speaking of this movie, what in the world is the synopsis? What is it about? It is about Peter Parker, of course, balancing his life as an ordinary high school student in Queens with the superhero alter ego Spider-Man, finding himself on the trail of a new menace, and that being, of course, Vulture. And if you know anything about the studio, they aim for this to be kind of a John Hughes / comic book movie. So that was kind of the backdrop for it. But we will go into details of this movie. So I'm going to tell you right now as a warning, there will be spoilers in this conversation. So here's a spoiler warning right here. This is a movie pie. So we're going to go into details. We're going to go into details on the screenplay, the performances, the visuals, in the audio, the direction, of course, and the experience. After that, we're going to dive into Trey's tweaks, those things that I would do to that I would have done differently in this movie, and then of course sum it all up with the whole pie, the score, and the verdict. But without further ado, let's roll on to the first slice of this movie pie, and that would be the screenplay. Now, I mentioned my concern about this movie being not a Spider-Man movie, but an Iron Man movie, or a co-Iron Man movie. And I'm glad to say that the concern was put to rest. Because, folks, this movie was written through and through as a Spider-Man movie. Wow, I thoroughly enjoyed the screenplay. This felt like a real kid in a real high school. And, to me, it much more than the previous Spider-Man movies. It was written in such a way that it felt realistic. It felt like it was, a kid in high school who happened to have superpowers, which is one of the reasons why I, as a kid, have always enjoyed Spider-Man. Honestly, this screenplay felt more like the high school stuff that I wanted. But, I love that they gave me more of the high school stuff that I wanted, because the narrative was really integrated within the film. And, it almost feels like, Peter, being in high school, that the high school was a character in itself. It was very, very well written in that way. It felt like, the setting, or rather just everything to do with the high school setting, was like a character in itself. And, I thoroughly loved the narrative of Iron Man being Spider-Man's mentor. I thought that was a great choice for this movie. Given how Spider-Man was introduced in Captain America Civil War, it made so much sense that Iron Man would be in this movie, that he would be mentoring Peter Parker / Spider-Man. In fact, it would have felt a little weird if Iron Man wasn't in this movie. But they definitely wrote Iron Man correctly for a Spider-Man film in this movie. That scene where Iron Man says, "If you're nothing without the suit, then you shouldn't have it." I love that scene, because it was great character development for both those characters. If you remember Iron Man 3, Tony Stark faced that question himself, the question of, who am I really without the suit? That I'm a mortal man without the suit. Because obviously in the movie prior to that, Avengers, he almost died going into space. And so that was the dilemma that he faced. And so it was very, really touching for him to get to the point where he's, dialoguing with Peter, and he's saying to Peter is like, "Hey, I'm nothing without the suit," because he's a kid just kind of learning the ropes. And Iron Man saying, "Hey, if you're nothing without the suit, you shouldn't have it. You don't deserve it if you feel like the suit makes you." So I really love that, especially considering that was a good setup for what happens later in the film. And later I'll mention something that I did not like in regards to that particular relationship, but overall I loved it. With the high school stuff being as important as it was, as I mentioned earlier, I felt like it added to the reveal that Vulture was Liz's father. Because if you think about it, if you take away all of the different high school elements, that particular scene would not have worked quite as well. In fact, it may have even bothered some people. If you didn't lace us with the theme of high school for Peter Parker, not only would it not have put us in the character's world, but it wouldn't have done it would have taken away from the reveal that Vulture was Liz's father. This idea in itself of the bad guy being the dad of the hero's love interest on its surface could come across pretty cheesy. But, the way that they, the way that the narrative was laid out, the way it was written, it came across perfectly. The basic plot of Vulture and his crew stealing technology from the Avengers, I thought was really awesome. It was refreshing, actually, because, it wasn't just your typical big bad guy, such as Ultron or, Loki or whatever. Hey, this was a very natural bad guy. Natural, I mean, when I say that, I mean, like, we needed to hear a little bit more of the narrative as to what happens when, all of this destruction is taking place, especially after Age of Ultron. There was so much destruction in that particular movie. It was very important that, they added, and I say this because I didn't even think that I needed that, but it's pretty cool. It was pretty cool to, actually give us a narrative of damage control, which, as you know, in the comics, if you don't know, damage control is an organization in the comics that basically goes and clean up the mess after the heroes fight these epic battles. So it was pretty cool to add that in there. And it was pretty cool to kind of birth a villain out of that. So I thought that was pretty cool. Hey, I also really enjoyed the bad guy gang in general. I thought that was pretty cool to give us a gang that was like family. They trusted each other. They respected one another. However, that leads to one of my problems that I had with the screenplay, and that is this, guys. That first Shocker guy, that dude, I did not feel like he belonged with that crew. Now, I get it. They kind of set him up in the beginning of the movie. He's showing up late for work. They kind of set him up as a real loser from the start. So I get that. But what I mean is that he, so we knew that the guy was a jerk. We knew that the guy was kind of a loser. But it didn't feel realistic that a character like that would stick with this crew that all trusted each other and that was all family for 8 years. Remember, these guys have been at it for 8 years. They've been building camaraderie. They've been trusting each other. They've been, holding on to this secret, doing a great job, being very successful for 8 years. So it kind of felt weird that this dude, that this guy would have stuck around for that long. To me, it felt like, either this crew would get rid of a person like that, or a person like that would have got his act together a long time ago. It just made no sense that this guy would be the way he was for 8 years. It would have felt a little bit better if maybe they did not actually introduce this guy at all. And, 8 years later, we just see that, oh, hey, they added a guy in the crew or something like that. I don't know. Either way, it just bothered me because it didn't feel like he fit with the rest of the team. It didn't feel natural. Also, along with that, it felt a little off for how quickly Vulture and the crew got over killing one of their own. Again, these guys have been at it for 8 years. This has been a tight working crew. As I mentioned, it's basically like family. So it felt a little off that, he would, that they would all get over that real quickly. Now I get it. They said that, he thought it was the Gatling, the gravity gun or whatever it was. But still, he literally shot the guy, said, I thought this was a gravity gun, paused for a moment, and then says to the guy, hey, you're the new Shocker. I mean, it was kind of like, okay, it seemed like there should have been a little bit more concern for killing their own, but whatever. That was one of the problems I had. The second problem that I had here is this, guys. Remember when I said earlier that we'll talk about the problem I had with Iron Man influence, his influence on Spider-Man? Well, it felt like Spider-Man was Spider Iron Man at times. In fact, a lot of times. Don't get me wrong. Overall, I like that Iron Man gives him the suit in the first place because it makes sense. Iron Man being who he is, if he's going to create something, he's going to create something the way he is going to create it. In fact, it would have felt a little off and felt out of place to me if Iron Man created a suit for Spider-Man and somehow it was a Spider-Man suit. So I felt like it was good for him to create the suit the way that he did. However, I wish that it didn't operate so much like an Iron Man suit, and I felt like overall it replaced Spider-Man's Spidey senses. Now, I know, as you guys may say, Trey, in this universe, they haven't set up that Spider-Man have the Spidey senses. I get that because obviously in the comics, he have the Spidey sense, which is awesome. It's this ability, this superhuman ability that acts as beyond reflex that basically almost tells the future for him. when he's in a moment of danger. It alerts him for danger. And it does so much more than that. But the point is that, yes, this particular rendition of Spider-Man has not there's nothing that said that he has spider sense. But because I know that Spider-Man has Spidey sense, and then at the same time you give me this Spidey suit that kind of does most of what the Spidey sense would do, it just took me out of the movie over and over again. Especially when you give all of these abilities, these features, especially when these features are the same features that Iron Man has for his suit. So I really did not like that. I did not like that at all. And I felt like that, here's the thing. Maybe they could add the Spidey sense later. But I felt like the Spidey sense is one way that you could have made Spider-Man a little bit more unique, like a more unique hero within the MCU. You got Iron Man already, and you also got War Machine. So you already kind of have, and even though Falcon is not like Iron Man, but you kind of have a character like Falcon. So, you have a lot of characters that are pretty similar in the MCU, and Spider-Man, I wanted a little bit of a different flavor. I wanted him to actually be Spider-Man. So I was a little annoyed at that. Actually, I was a lot annoyed at that going throughout the movie. And I say, like I said, the only saving grace is, maybe if they say that his abilities are evolving and he hasn't discovered the Spidey sense yet. But, that's for potentially for a future movie. I don't know whether or not if they're going to even include Spidey sense within this Spider-Man rendition. But speaking of Spider-Man's development, I'm glad that they didn't explore how he got his abilities. Like, I'm glad we did not need another origin story. However, I do wish that they spent more time talking about his abilities, like actually laying it out. What is he capable of? And just kind of saying that his natural abilities are still developing. And obviously they're still developing because obviously in the end of the movie, we see him lift that more than he ever had lifted before. So clearly his abilities are still developing. Clearly he's still evolving. So I felt like it would have added to that moment if they kind of foreshadowed a little bit or set it up earlier in the movie that Spider-Man and his abilities, they're still developing. So that was another thing that I felt like, man, it was throughout the movie, it just kind of felt like, yeah, we know that he's super strong, but is he also invulnerable to certain things? Because he would be taking these hits that, would have put an average person down. And I'm just like, man, like, would they really explain what he's capable of? So even if they would have given us a scene between, between him and Ned that just talked about, hey, what can you do? Because there's this scene where Ned is kind of talking about all of the different abilities. He's like, man, they could have like given us a little bit more of that. But anyway, all of those were the problems that I had with the screenplay. But overall, man, I can't stress enough how much I really love the way that this story was written. But anyway, what do you guys think? Join the conversation. Did you like the screenplay? Did some of the things I mentioned bothered me? Did they bother you? Did you like a Spider Iron Man, as I called him? Or maybe you were annoyed about it just like I was, but maybe you thought, you know what, it actually made sense. I loved it. Comment in the section below. Tell me your thoughts. What did you think about the screenplay? And in the meantime, I'm going to give this slice a score and a verdict. And for this slice, the screenplay, it gets 83% of 25 points. And that means it's a great slice. Now it's time to move on to the next slice of this movie pie, and that would be the performances. I really like most of the performances throughout this movie, but there were a few key ones that I want to highlight. And folks, I got to start with Tom Holland as Peter Parker / Spider-Man. Wow. He did an amazing job putting the curiosity quenching my curiosity as far as whether or not was he Spider-Man, was he Peter Parker. Yes, I believed it. He carried this film. He did a great job carrying this film. I believe that he was Spider-Man. I believe that he was Peter Parker. I love the emotional range that he brought to the role. In this movie, you see Tom Holland displaying emotions of sadness, of pure joy, of confusion, of fear. I mean, like, I was really impressed with the emotional range that he showed in this film. And that's really what I was wanting from Tom Holland in this film, that I did not know whether or not if I was going to get. Now, I think that he's a pretty good actor, and I like what he did in Civil War. However, I didn't get the sample size that showed the true emotional range quite like this movie did. So I thoroughly enjoyed the work that he did, the performance that he gave. Right alongside him, Michael Keaton as Vulture. Obviously, Michael Keaton is a fantastic actor, but it cannot be understated the amazing job that he did as Vulture. Again, I believed him. I believe that this was a guy who started off as a good man who went down a dark path. I really believe that this was a character who was screwed over by the man, and he wanted to, seize his moment, seize his opportunity to provide for his family. Along with that, I also believe that he really cared for his family. Because a lot of times you can get a villain in a story that goes down this dark path, that talks about that they care for his family, but the guy is such a jerk, or the guy, really is so evil that it doesn't really make sense that, or you don't really believe that he cares for his family. But Michael Keaton does a great job emoting, throughout this film, that showed that he really cared about his family. And it also showed that he really cared about his crew. The ways that he interacted with the crew, even I mentioned, how, the problems that I had with that moment. But even in that moment before he kills the first Shocker, you see, within Michael Keaton's character with Vulture, that he was trying his best to talk the guy out of it. You can almost see the subtext that this wasn't the first time that he had a problem with this guy. And you see the confliction in him. And I absolutely loved it. So Michael Keaton did a great job. Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark. Yes, again, he bring it. He did an awesome job as usual. I mean, this guy continues to elevate what he brings to this particular character. And I particularly love that scene where he grilled Peter Parker. That scene I mentioned earlier when he said, "Hey, if you believe you're nothing without the suit, you don't deserve it." So I really love that particular scene. You saw the anger and the anguish that Tony had for Peter, and the disappointment that Tony had for Peter. So he did a great job. Jon Favreau as Happy. He was another highlight for his film. I loved him. He was one of the reasons I enjoyed this movie, because throughout the movie, you got Happy Hogan interacting with Peter Parker, and I love this performance. And of course, it does help that I'm also a huge fan of Jon Favreau as an actor and as a director. So I love Jon Favreau. Jacob Batalon, I believe that's how you say his name. He did a great job as Ned, folks. I thought he was a really good addition to this film, being Peter Parker's friend. I actually felt like it made sense for him to be Peter Parker's friend. In this modern day, that guy, Ned, felt so natural in being Peter Parker's friend. It felt like, hey, I believed it. And he was hilarious throughout the film. He had me entertained throughout the film. And that would not have worked if it wasn't for Jacob's performance. And Marissa Tomei as Aunt May, yes, she was a very different and much younger Aunt May than we're used to, but I believed that she was Aunt May. I really liked her performance as Aunt May. I believe she genuinely cared about Peter. I believe that this is a woman who was going through some things. They don't really dive deeper into what happened to Uncle Ben, but in the loss of Uncle Ben, but clearly you felt like this was an Aunt May who experienced some loss, who experienced some pain, and that would not have worked. That would not have been communicated if it wasn't for Marissa's job. Overall, everyone else's performances were pretty good except this guy, Tony Revolori as Flash. Now, I didn't hate his performance, but I felt like he overacted pretty much all of his scenes. At least to me. That's the way I felt personally. I also felt like he didn't, I felt like he didn't really bring believable emotions to his role. Like, it just, the ways that, like, here's the thing. Remember how I talked about how Tom Holland gave us a lot of emotional range? Well, there was really no emotional range that Tony Revolori gave us. Like, it was pretty much the same one note emotion throughout the entire film. And so, yeah, I wasn't particularly impressed by his performance. So that was pretty much a black spot on the performances on this slice of the pie. But overall, I thoroughly enjoyed the performances in this film. What about you guys? Join the conversation. Did you guys think that Tony's Flash was particularly bothersome like it was for me? Or maybe you enjoyed it, maybe you thought that he was a good comic relief within the film. Comment on the section below, let me know. Also, let me know, what did you think about the other performances? Did I miss anything? Those were the performances that stuck out to me. What about you? What stuck out to you? Join the conversation. I'm gonna go ahead and give this slice a score and a verdict. And for this slice, the performances, it gets 88% of 20 points. And that means it is a great slice. All right, now it's time to move on to the next slice of this movie pie, and that would be the visuals. Now, overall, I really liked the visuals in this movie. There were a few things that I thought were particularly impressive. If you remember that scene, the ferry scene, I thought that was beautiful. That was an amazing scene, particularly, of course, that shot where Spider-Man is holding the two sides of the ferry together with the spider webs. I thought that was fantastic. That was awesome. So I love that scene. I love the Washington Monument scene. That was beautifully shot. The aerial views were fantastic. And of course, I actually really love the weapon and technology that Vulture and his crew used. The visual effects from those weapons were spot on, in my opinion. I thoroughly enjoyed the visuals. And overall, throughout the movie, you have multiple different scenes and shots that I thought was shot pretty well. But other than that, the visuals weren't too spectacular. See what I did there? The Spectacular Spider-Man. They weren't too spectacular, I would say. And then also, there were a few scenes that, I felt weren't properly lit. For example, there are several scenes at night where Vulture is flying, and it was too dark. Like, the scenery around it was like grass, and it kind of blended into just pure blackness rather than appear as grass and bushes or whatever. So some aerial views and street shot views, actually quite a lot of them, honestly. If you go back and watch the movie, you'll see what I mean. There were quite a number of scenes that were not properly lit. They felt overly dark. So that was a couple of times it actually did take me out of the movie just seeing it, because I'm like trying to see what I'm looking at, and just felt pretty dark. But either way, other than that, again, the visuals weren't too spectacular for a comic book movie. It does what it needs to do. But those three things I mentioned were the things that stood out to me. The ferry scene, the Washington Monument scene, thought was really well presented. And then, of course, the technology and the weapons, the energy that comes out of those weapons were pretty cool. Comment in the section below. Tell me, what do you guys think about this slice of the pie, the visuals? Were you particularly impressed with the visuals in this movie, or were you like me and it was just kind of, it did what it needed to do, that you overall liked it, but there wasn't a lot of impressive things? Did you notice throughout the movie as well that there were a couple of scenes that were a little too dark? And if you didn't notice it, and if you noticed it, did it bother you as much as it did me? Comment in the section below. Join the conversation. Tell me, guys, what you thought about the visuals of this movie. I'm going to go ahead and give this slice a score and a verdict. And for this slice, the visuals, it gets 77% of 5 points. And that means it is a good slice. Now it's time to move on to the next slice of this movie pie, and that would be the audio. I thoroughly enjoyed the audio in this film on multiple levels. I would get into this I would get into what I'm about to say a little bit later in the next slice. But first, let me tell you that I love the way that the music was introduced and integrated throughout the film. It truly blended with the story. And what I mean by that is I'm not just talking about the score, but I really like the soundtrack of this film. I thought that the use of the soundtrack was really, really well done. For example, that scene right after Peter Parker, got, the homecoming date for, the love interest for Liz. They had this preparation scene where they played, this music, and the music I felt was perfect for that particular scene. So I really did like the music for that scene. And I thought that the sound effects were spot on. It was spot on. I love the sound effects throughout this film. And so the audio in that was really good. I will say one blip, if you will, was that I thought that the sound balance was off from scene to scene. Several times, the movie would, and this is, again, it's always annoying to me because it always takes me out of the film whenever a film does this. But, it has a dialogue scene or, something going on where in this movie, it was really low as far as the sound. And then the very next scene, it was blaring, whether it's an action scene or whatnot. That balance was off and it took me out of the film a few times. But other than that, I enjoyed the soundtrack. I enjoyed the score, and I definitely enjoyed the sound effects. They sounded in fact, the sound effects of Spider-Man's webbing was awesome. That in particular was pretty cool. Vulture's wings, and that whole mechanism, it felt like and sounded like a machine. So it brought that to life for me. So I really enjoyed, for the most part, this slice of the pie. And like I said, I'll touch up on it in the next slice on a deeper level as to how I enjoyed the use of audio within this film. But what do you guys think? What do you guys think about the audio of this movie? Did you like the score? Did you notice the score? Did you like or notice the soundtrack within this film? Comment in the section below, join the conversation, and let me know what you think. I'm going to go ahead and give this slice a score and a verdict. And for this slice, the audio, it gets 73% of 5 points. And that means it is a good slice. Now it's time to move on to the fifth slice of this movie pie, and that would be the direction. This movie really did feel like a genuine comic book movie. But it also felt like a classic John Hughes movie, which is exactly what both Marvel and Sony were going for. John Watts, you are to thank for that, my friend. This would not have been possible without your direction in this film. You did such a wonderful job directing this movie, man. I love the work you did throughout this film, but one scene in particular put your direction over the top for me. And if you saw the movie, I'm pretty sure you guys know what scene I'm talking about. Yes, folks, it is that scene when Peter discovers that Vulture is Liz's dad. Now, I've mentioned that scene several times throughout this movie pie, but this is where I want to drive in how amazing that scene was. Honestly, it was one of my favorite scenes in all of the movies that I saw in 2017. It was one of my favorite scenes. Remember in the previous slice, I mentioned that I loved how the music was integrated and used in the film. Well, this scene encapsulates exactly what I mean by that. So here's the scene. You have what I just mentioned earlier, that music that was used for Peter being preparing, I should say, to take his date out to homecoming. And you have this music playing from the time of preparing to when Aunt May drops him off. And so Aunt May drops him off, and you still hear the music all the way up into Peter going to the door to knock on the door, at Liz's home. And then as soon as Vulture opens the door, the music stops. And folks, from that moment all the way through the car until Peter gets into the building of his high school, there is absolutely no music. Jon Watts, you did a splendid job at directing that scene. Your choice for not having music throughout that scene and your choice for the way that you directed, particularly Peter Parker and Vulture within that scene, was fantastic. It elevated you as a director, in my opinion. And in the moment where Vulture start to realize, so they're still in the car, and you see that the moment where Vulture starts to realize that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, if you go back and you watch it, not only was there music, but instead of music, he added this beat, these like drums that kind of added and built the tension between the two characters. Woo, I absolutely loved it. That scene was amazing. I love, when Peter enters the home and just, again, no music. You just kind of see the expression on Tom Holland's face. Jon Watts, you did a great job at getting that particular performance out of Tom Holland, because I felt for the man. Like, you can tell that the dude was genuinely afraid and confused and just completely, like, you can tell he did not know what to do. You can see the tension in his face. Wow, such a great job. And then, of course, you can see the tension in Vulture's face. Like, the way that Michael Keaton was, clearly confused as to about what was going on with Peter Parker. He's like, man, what's going on with this dude? And the way that the family interacted in that scene, just everything about it felt so amazing to me. I absolutely love that scene. I ate it up. Other than that scene, I love the way that you set up the reveal for that scene. In the beginning of the movie, you have, Vulture talking about the drawing for his little girl. So you introduce that he's a family man from the beginning of the movie. And then you stay consistent throughout the film as you consistently referred to his family within the movie. And then, of course, I don't know how many people called it, but when Vulture's, two of Vulture's members show up at the high school looking for the lost technology, one of them says the boss would kill us if he knew where we were. I don't know how many people caught that, but I caught that. Even the first time I caught that, kind of alluding to the fact and setting up the fact that, that, hey, they were in his daughter's school. So when it gets revealed that he's her father, it added a little bit even more to me when he says the boss would kill us if he knew where we were. Just throughout the film, Jon, you did a great job doing that. And I also thought you did a awesome job making this feel like a Spider-Man movie. And I was rooting for him throughout the entire film. And you did a great job integrating me within his world. The world of a high school student, the world of a teenager, the world of a super powered teenager who is confused about his place and what he would do. Him being mentored by Tony Stark, wanting to be a part of the Avengers, but not feeling and not believing or realizing, I should say, that he's not quite ready. Just that whole narrative I thought was really good. I will say that I wish that Spider-Man put up a little bit more of a fight in the last battle against Vulture. Now, I actually agreed with the way that you ended it. I thought it was a good way to end it by having Vulture's suit malfunction. But I wish that before that happened, that Peter Parker, that Spider-Man, put up a little bit better of a fight. I wanted a little bit more out of that particular battle. Again, I wasn't upset with how it ended, but I just felt like the lead up to it could have, been handled a little bit, not handled a little bit better, but I felt like you could have given us a little bit more. I mean, because we recently just saw Spider-Man lift up more than he ever have throughout the entirety of this film. So I just felt like you could have drew out a little bit more of that strength and cut loose a little bit more with what Spider-Man was capable of. I'm okay to give struggle to our heroes, and I'm okay that you showed that Spider-Man struggled, but I just wish that Spider-Man could have cut loose a little bit more and put up a better bout. The other thing is that, it's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. I get it whenever movies do this, but that scene when Peter meets up with Liz in the hallway, I mean, come on, folks. It was directly after the bell ring. If you go back and watch the movie and look for that scene, the bell rings and then out comes Peter Parker from a classroom by himself, and then he meets up with Liz by herself. And they literally have this entire scene, they have this entire moment without a single other student even coming out of the room or any classroom into the hallway. That was a little unbelievable. It took me out of the movie. Like, I felt like it was John, I felt like you could have did the exact same thing that you did and still given us that moment while having kids come out in the hallway just like a normal high school would have done. And the reason why it really took me out of it is because you did a great job throughout the film making this high school feel like a real high school, that by the time we get to that moment where you have, it just so happens that the main character and his love interest are the only two that come out in the hallway, it just took me out of it, man. So I wish you would have held back on that and reevaluated how you did that. But other than that, I thoroughly enjoyed the direction that you give. In fact, I got to give 2 bonus points for this slice because of that particular scene where Vulture finds out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And so that's what I thought about this slice, the direction. What did you guys think about the direction of this film? Comment in the section below. Please join a conversation. I am curious if you guys enjoyed that scene as much as I did where Vulture found out that Peter was Spider-Man. Were you bothered by some of the things that I was bothered by? Were you left a little bit underwhelmed like I was with the last battle of Spider-Man against Vulture? Comment, let me know what you guys think. I'm going to go ahead and give this slice a score and a verdict. And for this slice, the direction, it gets 91% of 20 points plus 2 extra bonus points. And that means it is an excellent slice. All right, now it's time to move on to the final slice of this movie pie, and that would be the experience. Walking out of the theater after seeing this movie, I was still smiling from ear to ear. And I pretty much did that throughout this film. I really enjoyed watching this movie. It put to rest the concern that I had going in about Iron Man being basically the co-lead. And it did more than that. It also, of course, quenched my curiosities about Tom Holland and what he was going to do as Spider-Man and Peter Parker. I felt like he was Spider-Man and he was Peter Parker. He did a great job. And the other thing is that I really did feel like it not only integrated within the MCU, but it really added to the MCU. It added to the narrative and it added to the mythology of this cinematic universe that, you have damage control. Now, I know, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, that damage control is in the comics, but up until this movie, damage control hasn't really been introduced within a cinematic universe. So I thought it definitely added to the MCU. And you know what? Talking about Tom Holland, I felt really connected to him as a character. And I really cared about him in the journey that he was on. I really cared about him. I cared about his stuff as Peter Parker with what he was going through in high school. And I also cared about his stuff as Spider-Man with what he was going through with Spider-Man and trying to fit in with the Avengers and trying to impress Iron Man. I really cared about that journey. And I was drawn into this world throughout the story. And I was engaged for the most part. I mentioned some of these moments earlier, but there were a few moments that kicked me out of the film. There were a few moments that dragged a bit, but overall, I really enjoyed myself watching this movie. I particularly loved the many hilarious moments laced throughout the film because it ranged from, subtle humor to upfront humor. It also was overall laced with clever humor. Very, very clever humor throughout the film, particularly with Happy and Peter Parker. That was really clever. Some of the things they did with Iron Man was really clever, as of course usual. But one of the most hilarious moments that I had in the film, I don't know how many people caught it, but do you remember that scene where Peter Parker was bussing the ATM robbers for the, and they were dressed up like the Avengers? If you look behind Peter Parker, there's a poster, an ad that talked about identity theft, that we will help you stop identity theft or something like that, while he's in the middle of bussing robbers pretending to be the Avengers. I thought that was pretty clever, and it got a chuckle out of me. And this movie was really kind of decorated with stuff like that type of clever humor. So I really enjoyed myself watching this movie. What did you guys think? What was your experience watching this movie? Were you particularly inspired? Were you encouraged? Did it meet your expectations going into the movie? Comment in the section below and let me know. Join the conversation about what you thought about this slice of the pie. I'm going to go ahead and give this slice a score and a verdict. And for this slice, the experience, it gets 89% of 25 points. And that means it is a great slice. Now, let us dive into Trey's tweaks, where I will give up to 3 things that I would have changed within this movie that would have overall increased the score that I'm giving for this movie. It would have increased my overall enjoyment, or just would have made for a better movie, in my opinion. Now, the idea here is to not dramatically change the direction that the studio wanted to go. So I'm just going to give you some tweaks. And I have 3 for this movie. And the first is this, folks. Here it is. I would have made it so that the movie ended with Spider-Man deciding to craft his own suit. Because if you look at the way the movie ended with Spider-Man, saying, hey, I don't want to become a part of the Avengers. There's more work for me to do back in Queens. And he walked away from the brand new suit that Tony Stark was going to give him. And I felt like that I would have made it so that instead, not only, I like that they did that, but I would have made it so that, they would have added that not only did Peter walk away from it, but that he decided. So maybe he tells himself, maybe he tells Happy, maybe he tells Iron Man. I don't know, but he says that he's going to make his own suit or something of that kind. In the end of the day, the point that I'm trying to make is that I would have not had Peter gain the Iron Man suit at the end, or at least if he gained the Iron Man suit at the end, that it would have not been the exact same suit. And now I understand that overall the movie ended with, of course, Aunt May discovering that he's Spider-Man, but the movie could have ended with, Aunt May seeing that Spider-Man was making a new suit or something like that. I don't know. Either way, I just felt like we're kind of back where we started. As far as him having the Iron Spider suit. So I would have changed that on some level. I would have tweaked that on some level. The second thing is this, is like I said, I think it's fine that Spider-Man got the suit from Iron Man in the first place. But I would have dialed down the use of Iron Man's features on the Spidey suit to make Spider-Man more unique. Overall, one way that they could have done this is this, that they could have had Spider-Man discover the Spidey senses. Now, I don't want to drift too far away from what the studio may have wanted. It is possible that Sony and Marvel did not want Spider-Man to have spider senses in this universe. It is possible. But they haven't explicitly said that they did not want to do that. So to me, I would have added Spidey senses for this Spider-Man, as Spider-Man have in the comics. I would have added that, because I felt like the Spidey senses would have been a good way to still have Peter Parker and Spider-Man do the things that he did throughout this film without having the use of the Iron Man suit. You could have dialed back on it. And what I mean by dialed back on it is, obviously the Spider suit talked to him just like Iron Man's suit. It could have, maybe not talked as much like Iron Man's suit talks to him, or something along that line. Either way, I just would not have made it so overt like Iron Man's suit. The third thing that I would have changed is, yes, I had to pick this one. I would have made it so that Peter and Spider-Man put up a better fight at the end before Vulture's wings malfunction. I would have given him a better bout. So those are the things that I would have tweaked in this film. What about you guys? Do you have anything that you would have changed? And if so, what were those things? What are those things? Do you agree with some of the things that I say that I would have changed? Do you disagree? Comment in the section below, join the conversation, and let me know what you think. What are your tweaks? Now it's time to move into the movie pie itself, the final score and verdict of this movie. And let's start by giving a brief slice recap. If you remember, I said that the screenplay was a great slice and it earned 20.8 points. The performances I also said was a great slice, earning 17.6 points. The visuals I said was a good slice and it earned 3.8 points. The audio I said also was a good slice and it earned 3.6 points. The direction I said was an excellent slice and it earned 20.2 points. And the experience I said was a great slice and it earned 22.3 points. If you add all of that up, you get 88 points. Out of 100 points, that is 88%. But what does that mean for Spider-Man Homecoming? Well, let's find out. Spider-Man Homecoming is a great movie. So if this movie was a pie, it would be very tasty. So those are my thoughts about this film. I thought it was a great film. What about you guys? Did you also think that it was a great film? What does that mean? That means that I personally felt like that Marvel and Sony did a great job producing this film. And I look forward to more collaboration going forward between these two studios. But what did you guys think? Did you think that they also did a great job? Maybe you were underwhelmed by the film. Did you expect more from it? Do you consider it just a great movie? Maybe some of you think that it was an excellent movie. Comment in the section below and let me know what you think. Join the conversation. And speaking of conversation, let's continue it with this question. Here's the posed question, folks. Out of all three actors who played the cinematic Spider-Man, who do you think played the best Peter Parker and who do you think played the best Spider-Man? Out of Andrew Garfield, Tom Holland, and of course, Tobey Maguire. Who did you think played the best Peter Parker and the best Spider-Man? So click right here and vote, letting me know exactly how you guys would answer that question. And thank you guys so much for checking out this movie pie. If you like this, please go ahead and click the thumbs up and consider subscribing if you have not subscribed. Join our community, join our conversation. Give this video a share if you also liked it, and also encourage them to join our community and subscribe as well. This has been Trey MacVelle, and until the next slice of pie, peace out.